It seems to be a little bit arbitrary what separates long-standing permanent modes like Abyss, Teapot, and TCG from limited events. There have been some that even say that Teapot, and especially TCG, could or should have released as their own separate games completely, while some limited events, such as Labyrinth Warriors, have been requested by the community to become permanent additions to the Genshin base game itself. And conversely, there's also permanent modes like fishing, which almost everyone could agree would have worked better as a temporary event. It's messy, and no one agrees on everything, but I think the general consensus is people want long-term things to work at and get engrossed in. That seems to be the unifying idea. It's the events or modes with deeply developed systems that have the potential for future expansion and growth that either have success as permanent modes, or have players wanting them to become permanent modes if they're events. That's why players clamored so much for Labyrinth Warriors to become permanent. It had a solid design, good systems, and a setup for lots of future expansions, such as possible new mazes, new enemies, new levels. There's a lot that can be done with that. That's why Teapot and TCG work as permanent modes. Teapot furnishings release constantly, and you can build to your own limitless imagination. Well, I won't say limitless, since there are limits, but you know what I mean. As for TCG, new cards release periodically, and it even has balance patches keeping it fresh. As for Abyss, the enemies and fighting conditions change over time, at least giving it some kind of new experience every few cycles. Me being a combat and exploration lover like I am, it's rare a non-combat event comes along that I would want permanently. I enjoy the temporary non-combat events, sure, but by the time they end, I've had my fill of them and am indifferent when they leave. But I guess there's a first time for everything, because we just had one of the most non-combat, chillest events of all time, and if I'm going to be honest, I really liked it and now I'm sad that it's gone. This would be Alchemical Ascension, the recent potion making event. I absolutely did not expect to enjoy this so much, like, it's so far removed from what usually grabs my attention. It's not combat, I don't get to use my characters or even trial characters, there's no conflict, and you don't even get to walk around much. It all happens in a fixed location in Mondstadt, and half of the gameplay involves play screens. It doesn't even happen on the map itself. And yet, despite all this, I see potential here for a nice long-term mode, or maybe even the workings of what could be its own game. Like, no dude, like, I'm not even kidding, I'd play this as its own standalone business simulator. It's really a nice little game mode. Although, of course, as a permanent mode or its own standalone game, it would have to check those important boxes of having solid game design, good systems, and importantly, the potential for future expansions. You know, the things that make those other modes like Abyss, Teapot, and TCG successful. But that's the thing. I see very well here where those boxes are ticked. With some expansions, it could definitely work. Okay, so to explain the game mode itself, the idea is that you mix potions to sell with varying effects, and you follow the worldwide demand to maximize profit. That's it, that's the game mode. Simple at its core, and that's perfect because you don't want the main point of the game to be complicated. Any complexity is better reserved for how to actually achieve that main point. But how is it done? Well, let me explain the gameplay loop and what I believe to be the subtle genius of this mode. Every few cycles, you get a market newsletter which shows you 3 different market demands. Here, you can see that the Millilith and Liyue want to clear out monsters and remain calm while doing so. Someone participating in the Pancration tourney in the Fortress of Mirrorpeed has a demand for physical capability boosts, and academia students want something to calm their spirits and let them focus. For cycles 20 through 22, the idea is to make potions that can satisfy these market demands. The more your potion is in tune with what they're asking for, and the higher quality your potion is, the more money you'll make during the cycle. So, how do you make the potions? Well, you start with ingredients. There's a cultivation area where you literally grow the ingredients used for your potions. This is an important part because without the right ingredients, you might not be able to make potions that match the market demand. Why is that? Well, each ingredient comes with one of 5 main efficacies and 10 characteristics. Think of efficacies as the equivalent of artifact main stats, and characteristics as substats, only they're fixed here. The 5 main efficacies are Constitution, which you can kind of think of as health, Strength, Dexterity, Wisdom, Charisma, and a pseudo 6th efficacy called Balance, which is a little bit of all. As for the 10 characteristics, you have Endurance, Strengthening, Steadying, Technique, Relaxing, Healing, Focus, Perception, Fragrant, and Warm. Don't worry, you don't have to remember all of these for the purpose of this essay, but point is, when making potions, you'll have to go for potions that satisfy the overall main efficacy, while having characteristics that also enhance their usefulness relative to the demand. Paying attention to the market cycles and knowing what to grow, especially early on when you don't have many plots for cultivation, is important. After you cultivate ingredients, then you go and make the potions. But it's not a simple auto-click and you're done kind of thing. Nah, this is the part where things get interesting, and honestly a bit fun. You're given a grid to work with, and all of your cultivated ingredients in inventory are listed down the right side. Each ingredient has a Tetris shape kind of thing going on, where you can place them in the grid, filling out as much of the grid as you can. The more of the grid you fill up is the stronger and more efficient your potion will be, so you want to cover as much of the grid as possible. As you progress, you get some stacking slots, where you're actually allowed to stack on top of spaces that are already used. You only get a few, like 3 or 4, but they can come in clutch for maximizing the grid space used. It shows the ingredient efficacy noted with a little symbol, blue heart for Constitution, green book for Wisdom, etc. But the part that makes things so tricky here is that the characteristics might be tied to efficacy pieces you don't need for the current potion. I'll explain. You can only make 1 potion per cycle, so with the ingredients on hand, I decided I was going to first go for the 3rd demand. As stated, academia students are looking for a way to calm themselves and let themselves focus on research. Of the 5 main efficacies, Constitution, Strength, Dexterity, Charisma, and Wisdom, Wisdom is the obvious choice. As for characteristics, it says the students are looking for a way to calm themselves and focus on research. Of the 10 characteristics, it sounded to me like relaxing and focus were the ones to zero in on. One problem though. Of my 3 wisdom ingredients, the characteristics are healing, technique, and technique. No relaxing or focus characteristics on my wisdom pieces. However, 2 of the dexterity pieces did have relaxing as a characteristic, and 1 of the balanced pieces had focus. So, in order to make this wisdom potion, I was going to have to mix in a little dexterity as well, it seemed. As you place ingredients into the grid, there's a radar chart, or radar graph as some might call it, in the top left that shows the main efficacies. You'll also see 4 rings corresponding with beginning, intermediate, advanced, and expert. The more ingredients you add is the more an efficacy spikes on the radar chart. And by the time you concoct the potion, whichever efficacy spikes the highest will determine the potion main efficacy type. If wisdom spikes into the 3rd ring of the radar chart, it will be an advanced wisdom potion, for instance. As well, the potions can share 2 efficacies at once, so if dexterity spikes into the 3rd ring as well, it will be an advanced dexterity and wisdom potion. That said, with this particular potion, knowing that I had to add some dexterity ingredients since that's the only way I could get the relaxing characteristic, I had to keep dexterity equal to or below the same ring as wisdom in the radar chart, otherwise it would just turn out to be a straight up dexterity potion. So, enough wisdom pieces to get the wisdom main efficacy in the mix, and enough relaxing characteristic pieces to have it show up as a trait, but not so many that the wisdom gets overshadowed by the dexterity pieces that carry the relaxing characteristic. Got all that? A careful balancing act. This is what I mean by subtle genius. If the idea is to make potions, which we tend to think of as being these magical elixirs that have to be perfectly proportioned, or they either don't work or have possible consequences, then this was a good way to portray that. The more you put in this grid, or cauldron as the game would say, the stronger the potion will be, and the more it will sell. But you can't just load it randomly. You have to fine-tune the ingredients, rotate them, fit them in different ways, so that your desired efficacy stands out as well as any desired characteristics. I mean, you don't want your customer to drink the potion and turn into a frog, do you? Yeah, this is subtly a really good take on proportional potion mixing. Call it proportional. Yeah, bad pun. Anyway, as for this potion, here it is, the best I could come up with. I had to use 3 stackable slots, but even then, after all was said and done, there was 1 space left over. But this was the best I could do. I rearranged it in so many ways, removing pieces and rotating pieces, to try to cover the entire grid. I just couldn't make it happen, not without sacrificing my important efficacies and characteristics. This was it. This was the optimal potion. An intermediate dexterity and wisdom potion, with not only focus and relaxing as characteristics, but healing as well. There was just no way to avoid the healing characteristic, as it was a part of my wisdom ingredient. But I couldn't really avoid the dexterity efficacy in my effort to get the relaxing characteristic, since relaxing was attached to the dexterity pieces. As for the focus characteristic, that came from a balanced ingredient, which again gives a little bit of all of the efficacies. But if you look at the radar chart, you'll see that wisdom was just a tiny bit off, a pixel, from branching into the advanced ring. But I just couldn't add any more to the grid. I'd used up all my stackable slots. I tried so long that I'm convinced this is the best I could do. So I concocted it, put it in a bottle, decorated it, and then went to put it up for sale. Before doing that, I put money into enhancing my current potions though. So yeah, it was time to put it up for sale. Cool. On display are my previous potions from the last cycle, but remember, you can only make one potion per cycle. What this means is that here I want to remove whatever potions are irrelevant to the 3 demands and try to keep the ones that will sell the best. I clear all the potions out just to get a fresh start and read over the market news. The first one I put up for sale is my newly crafted Wisdom and Dexterity potion with focus and relaxing characteristics, as I expect it to make the most money back. Looking at past potions I've made, I also have another Wisdom potion with technique and focus as characteristics. While this potion is purely a Wisdom potion, unlike the one I just made, which is Wisdom and Dexterity, it still does have focus as one of the characteristics, although it's missing the relaxing characteristic. It's been leveled up many times as well at level 13. That said, this is still a pretty good one to put up for sale. But I still want to put something out there to cover the other demands, especially since I only have so many Wisdom potions, or potions with relaxing or focus as characteristics. So I look over the other requests just to see if I have anything in inventory that can somewhat match what they're asking for. I put up my advanced Constitution plus Strength potion with strengthening and steadying as characteristics, as it sounds like it would sell great for the Pancration Ring tournament at the Fortress of Mirrorpeed. I put up a Dexterity potion with endurance and relaxing as characteristics, as I feel this could have some use to the Millilith request to clear out monsters and remain calm while doing so. It would be really good if it was a Strength potion rather than Dexterity, but Dexterity doesn't sound terrible as the main efficacy, and the endurance and relaxing characteristics still sound good for it. So it should make some kind of return. I do still add a Strength potion with endurance and steadying as characteristics, although it's not a high level potion, just intermediate level 5. But again, it should make something either through the Millilith request or Fortress of Mirrorpeed request. And lastly, I add a Strength and Dexterity potion with endurance and warm characteristics. The warm is pointless, but having Strength and Dexterity as efficacies with endurance as a characteristic sounds great for the Fortress of Mirrorpeed request. I'm alright with selling this one, I guess. And then I leave, and I end the current cycle and await to see the fruits of our labor. And there you have it. Boom. Money! The Advanced Constitution plus Strength potion with strengthening and steadying characteristics made the most money at 52k. I'm guessing it had good use for both the Millilith and Pancration Ring requests, who knows, but it did really well. The new Wisdom plus Dexterity potion I crafted made the next highest amount at 36k, followed by the Pure Wisdom potion at 35k. The Dexterity potion made 25k, and the other ones didn't even break 20. But we knew those wouldn't do amazing, we were just trying to sell the best things we could to fit the requests. So, cycle over, money made, there we are. Now we can go cultivate ingredients and do other stuff, but not before talking to this Atifa lady who will actually do business with us by selling our potions back in Sumeru due to the demands there. All you have to do is choose potions that satisfy the conditions he laid out, and choose a couple of marketing strategies, and there you go. She'll come back with money after the next cycle as well. So then it's time to cultivate ingredients, which means picking them up or changing them out to grow different pieces you might need next when making potions. Some only take one cycle, while others take multiple cycles to mature. You can spend money to speed up the process, but with careful planning, you should have enough ingredients on hand to make whatever potion you want. After cultivating, it's a good idea to talk to Frida as well, who sells all kinds of things to make the process better and more efficient. She sells alchemical efficiencies, cultivation efficiencies, and others. She also sells practical things, such as a sales expansion contract. If I buy this, another person like the Atifa lady will come and do distribution business with me. But as you see, it cost 600,000. I don't even have that much on hand yet. Frida also sells these cauldron upgrades, which you can see I've bought out. Essentially, what these are bigger cauldrons, allowing you to naturally insert more ingredients. And can I just say here that once again, this is the kind of subtle thing I appreciate. You see, it's one thing when the game tells you you're buying a bigger cauldron, you can put in more ingredients, but it's another when it directly affects the game. See, when you're mixing potions, you have the grid. This grid directly influences how many ingredients you can add without overstacking them on top of one another, which in turn limits how high you can get the efficacies to spike in the radar chart. Well, when you buy bigger cauldrons, this grid expands. I forget what it started as, a 5x5 grid, 5x6. I can't remember, but each time you get a bigger cauldron, the dimensions expand to represent that, as the grid is the cauldron that you're literally putting your ingredients into. It's a nice way to help visualize that we are indeed buying a bigger cauldron, rather than it just giving us better stats. It opens up more room for us to place ingredients on the grid, and this gives us more opportunity to raise the efficacies into new rings on the radar chart. I think that's pretty cool. They did a nice job of thinking of how to translate the idea of a bigger cauldron into the gameplay itself. As well, Frida sells more cultivation areas, which allow you to grow more ingredients. These are really useful, especially early on. You'll make sure you're growing what's needed according to the current demands in the market news cycle, but the more you have of these the easier it is to deal with. After finishing that last cycle and getting our returns, we can check the market news again and see what hit or missed. Wouldn't you know it, it's hilarious how much time I put into making a wisdom potion with focus and relaxing as the characteristics, when according to the market news now, the best-selling traits are wisdom, focus, and steadying, not relaxing. Before, all of these efficacies and characteristics showed up as question marks, so I had to kind of use my brain to figure it out. But after cashing in, it then shows you. Now, why on earth steadying is a preferred characteristic over relaxing, I don't know. When I read this description, it legit says students are seeking a means to calm their spirits and let them focus on research. Calm their spirits isn't that relaxing, that's how I read this, but I can understand how steadying also fits. It does only show 3 traits here though, so maybe more traits do work in some situations? I just can't imagine that relaxing was a wrong choice here, considering the prompt. Which I mean, the potion did sell well and make a lot of money for what it's worth, so yeah. Maybe relaxing did count as a kind of invisible 4th trait? Are the success of potions just limited to the traits that are shown, or do other traits beyond just the ones shown have some level of success as well? That's something that's not very clear, and if the event does return one day, that should be explicitly addressed. Whatever, I guess, but it does bring up one criticism I have, and that's over the descriptive clarity of the efficacies and characteristics. Don't get me wrong, I like how the demands are written. You have to read them and figure out what's the best kind of potion to make, and with what traits. I wouldn't change a thing there, but there could have been a little more care towards efficacy and characteristic definitions. For instance, the Constitution efficacy. It does have a blue heart symbol, and I'm sure most people know that one's constitution pertains to one's general health. I'm talking like Cloud Retainer now, what the heck. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some people couldn't figure that out, particularly younger players that don't have large vocabularies yet. But even for those who do know what Constitution means in health terms, it's still a little vague in the context of this game. For instance, some might take it to mean resilience, especially in the context of this being Genshinimpact, where defense is a resilience stat. Physical resilience, as opposed to, say, hardy vitality, as also opposed to, say, resistance to sickness, which are all three different things. They could have just simplified this efficacy by naming it health. The dexterity efficacy was also one that I felt was a little undefined. You can have dexterity in how you perform a task with your hands, which is usually how the word is used. But there is a more general usage of the word as well, in which you can have dexterity in how you physically move your body, being speedy, swift, and nimble. Yeah, see, usually dexterity refers to working with one's hands, but there is that other general definition. But without knowing whether the game is particularly talking about handiwork when it says dexterity, or if they mean general dexterity, it's hard to decide when to go for it as the main efficacy. Especially since there are some potion requests in which general physical speed sounds like a desired trait. Some characteristics also follow this. For instance, one is strengthening. What's the difference between the strength efficacy and strengthening characteristic? And what's the nuance between the endurance and steadying characteristics? Or for that matter, the steadying and relaxing characteristics. It's hard to tell their idea of what steadying means here because it can go several ways. The academia students wanted something to calm them, which led me to focus on relaxing as a characteristic, when steadying was the more correct choice according to the market news. I just wish that was a little better defined is all. Same with the game's idea of constitution and dexterity. It sounds silly, I know, because I know what these words mean, but the game seems to have slightly different takes on them. That's also what confused me about their perception characteristic. That word can mean a couple of things. Are we talking about actual physical, visual, and auditory perception here? Being able to laser focus through touch, sight, and hearing? Or does it mean perception as in being able to understand a concept, to perceive the meaning of something, to take in information and be able to understand it? They are similar definitions of the same word. One is sensory take-in, heightened awareness, and the other is a take-in and application of concepts and knowledge, heightened understanding. In the context of making potions, though, it would matter. Alright, yeah, humor me here with this example. If, say, there was a demand for someone who was planning on hunting monsters in the middle of the dark night, a strength potion with their perception characteristic might be wanted in the sensory sense of the word, to help them stay sharp in the dark. But if, say, there was a demand for someone who was trying to decipher an ancient text, a wisdom potion with the perception characteristic might be wanted in the conceptual understanding meaning of the word. I loved this event, but I still don't know which exact way they meant perception. It would have been better if they labeled it either sensory or alertness if they meant it that way, or deciphering or understanding if they meant it in the other. Alright, I spent longer talking about that than I intended to, but I did want to bring it up. For a mode that requires players to read prompts and figure out what's needed, clarity is imperative. So I just wanted to put that out there, but I didn't mean to spend so long on it. But yeah, this was the gameplay loop. I didn't get to use my characters, I didn't get to fight, and yet I was thoroughly entertained. I guess the best way to think of it is this. With mini events, I'm kind of wanting it to be over because it starts to feel like an obligation, a chore for the rewards. Whereas here, I'm actively liking the event and would like more prompts to follow. I could just spend some chill time doing this. That's it, that's how I know this was a pretty good event, with a good amount of thought put into its loops and systems. When an event in this game makes you sad to see its conclusion, rather than rejoice that it's over, that's special, that's pointing to something. Something was done right here. Now, I can only speak for myself here, of course, but from my gamer perspective, I think it's because I do see the potential for large-scale game loops underneath it all. This could easily be expanded into a pretty substantial half-farming, half-business simulator game. How so? Well, just take everything to its logical extreme. So yeah, imagine for instance buying a cauldron so large that the grid becomes 10 by 10, 15 by 15. Imagine adding a spoil mechanic where certain ingredients lose potency or straight up spoil if not used in enough cycles, forcing you to really carefully plan your cultivations. Imagine you can buy 2 cauldrons, 5 cauldrons, meaning you're managing multiple grids at once. On top of all this, imagine 25 efficacies rather than 5, and 100 characteristics rather than 10. Imagine hundreds or even thousands of individual prompts and requests. Imagine ease of availability factoring into how well potions sell, requiring you to travel to other lands and personally sell in new shops that you open up in other regions to get the maximum local profit. For instance, that Millilith request, what if it sells okay out of Mondstadt's shop, but sells even better out of the Leeway shop? So I have to set up in Leeway for 3 cycles to maximize its potential on-site revenue. But in doing so, the rest of my potions might be affected, being further away from their respective requests. Imagine if there were hot requests that sell super well if you can feel the demand, like a special order kind of thing. In this case, even if selling from Mondstadt's location might hurt the sales from your Fontaine order, it might be worth it because of all the extra bank you could make from that hot request. Is evenly satisfying all the requests better, or is it much more profitable just to go all in on the hot request? Decisions. There's so much to work with here, expanding on cultivation areas, turning them into mini farms, 200 to 300 different ingredients with all kinds of efficacies and characteristics, and even adverse characteristics or clashing ones where adding a particular trait actually takes away from another one. For instance, there is a warm characteristic already in the game, which I remember using in a potion to keep the shrine maidens at the Grand Arakami Shrine warm on cool nights. What if there was a cold characteristic too? And what if by adding both, they negated each other at a 1-to-1 rate? Or an alertness or awakeness characteristic going against a drowsy characteristic. So much to play with here, and so many ideas to expand it. Of course, the question becomes to what end, and that's a fair question. People generally do like to have an ultimate goal to strive for. One of Genshin's biggest criticisms itself from many players is that the game can feel a bit aimless concerning long-term purpose for building your characters. Heck, even I feel that way sometimes. My Navia can two-shot some world bosses, but to what progressive goal does that matter overall? I'm still gated and have to wait for the same quests and stories as everyone else. It's kind of like the classic response when someone says, "I can do this thing," and another person just says, "Okay, want a cookie?" Similarly, if the potion crafting event was made a permanent mode, or even its own game, what would the end goal be? The ongoing goal is making tons of money through the potion business, but what would be the end goal? What would be the motivating reason to become a billionaire over just a millionaire, other than just being able to open up one more shop? Yay, I'm a billionaire. Okay, want a cookie? Like, I'll leave that up to the developers to create an incentive system. We'll be here even longer than we have been if I go to brainstorming incentive loops. Though it's not like I'm bad at it or anything. That was the whole basis of my Revitalizing Abandoned Systems essay, which I encourage any listener to go listen to if they haven't already. As far as the potion event goes though, possible incentives aside, what I can say is that there are some pretty good base systems here to build such a mode or a game. Whatever incentives are put there. For now though, I'm just going to leave it here. This has been my longest essay to date, but it's just notable how, despite everyone having different tastes, whether it's for combat or TCG or building a village or whatever, sometimes there can still be something outside of a person's norm that catches their interest. When something is well done, it's just well done, and I think many people can respect all kinds of events, modes, and games on that alone. I do think I'm in that camp. I play all sorts of things. Genshin, League of Legends, Smash Bros. I even started Helldivers 2 recently. All vastly different games, but I think it's the quality of the games and their well thought out designs and systems that drew me in before anything else. And with that, I can give individual modes the same kind of respect. So credit where credit is due, I'm legit looking forward to the return of this event. Well done with this mode, Genshin. Well done. Thanks for listening.